High Counselor Dravak Salyun stood at the panoramic window of the Imperial Observation Spire, watching the twin violet suns of Zervan Prime dip below the crystalline skyline. 3,000 years of galactic domination stretched behind the Valderath Empire like a tapestry woven from conquered stars. They had absorbed 61 civilizations, mapped 40% of the known galaxy, and constructed megastructures that made younger species weep in awe. And yet, on this particular evening, Dravak Salyun was deeply, profoundly unsettled. "Show me the signal again," he said without turning around. Behind him, Fleet Admiral Yvonne Thresh manipulated the holographic display panel with her four-fingered hands. A waveform bloomed in the air, complex, layered, mathematically dense. The kind of signal their deep space sensors were never supposed to detect from a Class J planet. Class J worlds were pre-stellar civilizations. Stone tools. Maybe primitive agriculture. Certainly not this. "It was transmitted on a quantum-entangled frequency," said Chief Science Director Imuva Rill, her bioluminescent skin dimming with concern. "The entanglement depth suggests the sender wasn't just using quantum communication, they were bending it. Reshaping the entanglement matrix itself to encode a message across 11 simultaneous frequency bands. That's..." Dravak paused. "That's theoretically impossible below a Type 3 civilization." "Yes," Imuva said quietly. "And yet..." The planet in question was catalogued as Sector 7 Null, Object 3, a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow dwarf star in an unremarkable arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Imperial survey teams had flagged it 12,000 years ago as biologically active but technologically dormant. The indigenous species, bipedal, endoskeletal, highly emotional, had been listed under the designation, humanity. No further observation had been scheduled. Why would it be? But 3 days ago, a routine automated relay probe had picked up the signal. And then another probe confirmed it. And then a third. And when Dravak Salyun himself had verified the data with the Empire's most powerful analytical array, the readings had not changed. Humanity was transmitting. Loudly. Boldly. On frequencies that implied they not only understood quantum entanglement at a fundamental level, they had mastered it. "How long have we not looked at them?" Dravak asked. Yvonne checked her data. "Our last passive scan was 412 years ago. They were in an early industrial phase. Crude combustion engines. Basic electricity. No space travel. And now..." Imuva pulled up the decoded fragments of the signal. "Now they are transmitting navigation beacons, Counselor. Not radio beacons. Quantum navigation beacons. The kind we use to guide our own Imperial fleets through fold space corridors." The room went silent. Dravak finally turned from the window. His pale gray face, lined with the calm authority of decades in power, was for the first time showing something unfamiliar, confusion. "Send a scout vessel," he said. "The fastest one we have. Maximum sensor array. Full intelligence package. I want eyes on that planet within the week." "And if they detect us?" Yvonne asked. Dravak considered this. In 3,000 years of expansion, no civilization they had approached had ever detected a Valderath stealth scout at standard observation range. Their cloaking technology was, by all metrics, perfect. "Then we reassess," he said simply. "But they won't. They're a Class J civilization." He said it with confidence. But his hands, clasped behind his back, were trembling slightly. Across the galaxy, on that small blue-green world, in a cavernous underground facility carved into the basalt beneath the Atacama Desert in South America, a young woman named Dr. Serafina Voss stared at her terminal screen and smiled. She had just received a confirmation ping from the relay network she and her team had spent 11 years building. The quantum navigation beacons were live. The signal was propagating. "They'll see it," said her colleague, Dr. Marcus Okonkwo, rolling his chair over to peer at the data. "Something out there will see it." "Something already has," Serafina said, pointing at a faint but unmistakable response echo buried in the background noise. "Look at this signal return. That's not cosmic radiation. That's structured. That's a reply." Marcus stared. "How fast did that come back?" "Faster than light," she said. "Much faster." Marcus leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Well, we poked the universe." "We did," Serafina agreed. Then she opened a new communications channel to the rest of the Global Research Consortium. "Everyone needs to hear this. All of them. Now." 14 time zones away, in a quiet office building in Oslo, Norway, the consortium's Director of Interstellar Affairs, Dr. Elias Stormgard, was asleep at his desk when his emergency terminal lit up with an urgent priority alert. He was a careful man, methodical and slow to excitement. But when he read the message from Serafina Voss, he sat upright so fast he knocked his coffee across his keyboard. "Oh," he whispered to the empty room. "Oh, that's it then." He picked up his secure satellite phone and began making calls. Not to governments. Not to military commanders. To scientists. To engineers. To the quiet, brilliant people who had spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. The moment humanity stopped waiting to be found and decided, with characteristic human stubbornness, to introduce itself. The Valderath Empire's fastest scout vessel, the ISV Precise Clarity, departed Zervan Prime within 18 hours of Dravak Salyun's order. Its captain, a lean and experienced officer named Veth Neril, had conducted over 200 covert observation missions across his career. He was unflappable, methodical, and completely certain that this assignment would be routine. He was wrong. 12 days later, when the ISV Precise Clarity dropped out of fold space at the edge of the Sol System's Oort cloud and activated its long-range sensor array, Captain Veth Neril received the first indication that this mission was something entirely different. The sensors reported back not silence, not primitive radio chatter, not simple orbital satellites, but a dense, layered technological infrastructure that made his sensor officer utter a soft sound of disbelief and then go completely quiet for 30 full seconds. "Report," Veth said. The sensor officer, a young Valderath named Suk Ellen, turned slowly from her console. Her blue-gray eyes were wide. "Captain," she said, I'm detecting quantum fold resonators. In orbit around the third planet. Multiple ones. At least 47 distinct signatures." Veth sat forward. "That's not possible." "And," Suk continued, her voice careful and controlled, "I'm detecting fold space wake signatures in the outer system. Recent ones. Very recent. Something has been traveling in fold space in this system, sir. Something that belongs here." Veth Neril did not respond immediately. He looked at the display showing the small blue-green world at the center of this inexplicable data and thought about the report he was going to have to file. After a long moment he said, "Enhanced stealth protocols. All systems to silent running. And get me a secure channel to Zervan Prime." He needed to tell High Counselor Dravak Salyun something that 3,000 years of Valderath imperial history had never required anyone to say. "We may not be the most advanced civilization in this sector anymore." Captain Veth Neril had been in the Imperial fleet for 43 years. He had observed dying stars, watched civilizations collapse under the weight of first contact shock, and once, memorably, navigated his vessel through a black hole's accretion disk to retrieve a stranded ambassador. He was not a man easily rattled. But what his sensor array was showing him right now was rattling him considerably. "Run the diagnostic again," he told Suk Ellen for the third time. "Captain, the diagnostic shows clean results. All sensor arrays are functioning within normal parameters." Suk's voice remained professional, but her bioluminescence was flickering, an involuntary stress response she clearly couldn't control. "What I'm showing you is accurate." The holographic display above the bridge's central console painted a picture that violated Veth's understanding of what a Class J civilization should look like. The third planet, Earth, according to the ancient survey data, was ringed not just with satellites and orbital platforms, but with what could only be described as infrastructure. Massive, geometrically precise structures in geostationary orbit. Energy readings that suggested not solar panels or primitive reactors but something far more sophisticated. And woven through all of it like a nervous system, a constant, dense web of quantum-entangled communication signals. Then there were the ships. "I count 17 distinct vessel signatures in the inner system," said Navigator Pak Urith from his post. 8 in low planetary orbit, 4 near the second planet, 2 in the asteroid belt doing, it looks like active mining operations, and 3 in the outer system that are moving too fast for anything we'd expect." "How fast?" Veth asked. Pak checked and double-checked. 0.47 light, sir. Sustained. Veth did not visibly react. Internally something cold moved through him. 0.47 light was faster than any non-full drive vessel in the Valderath fleet. His ship, the ISV Precise Clarity, could manage 0.31 at maximum conventional thrust before fold space engagement was more efficient. The idea that a species which, for centuries ago, had been burning fossil fuels in the atmosphere of their single planet was now casually running cargo or patrol routes at nearly half the speed of light without fold space technology was not something he had a framework to process. "What are they using for propulsion?" he asked. His chief engineer, old Dramek Oso, was already pulling the spectral analysis. He squinted at the results. Dramek was 78 years old and had spent 40 of those years analyzing alien propulsion signatures. He had never been wrong about a reading. He looked at the data now for a very long time without speaking. Dramek, Veth said. I'm trying to make sense of it, Dramek said. The emission signature is consistent with a contained antimatter annihilation drive. But the efficiency ratio is wrong. The Valderath antimatter drive achieves about 63% conversion efficiency, which is, as you know, the highest in the known galaxy. He paused. These readings suggest a conversion efficiency of approximately 91%. The bridge went completely silent. That's not possible, said Suk. That's what the sensors show, Dramek replied flatly. Veth Nerl stood up from his command seat. He walked to the forward viewport and looked out at the distant yellow star and too far to see with the naked eye, the planet orbiting it. He thought about the report he was composing in his head. He thought about how Dravok Salyan was going to receive it. He thought about what it meant, really meant, for the Empire if a civilization they had dismissed as primitive 12,000 years ago had somehow, in the blink of a geological eye, not just caught up to the Valderath but in some measurable areas surpassed them. I want full scans of every structure in the system, he said. Passive only. Nothing active. I don't want to announce ourselves until we understand what we're looking at. Understood, Suk said and began the long sweep. What she found over the next 6 hours filled 47 data cores and left the entire crew of the ISV Precise Clarity speaking in hushed voices. The orbital structures around Earth were not merely stations or platforms. They were city structures. The largest, positioned at the L4 Lagrange point, registered a mass comparable to a small moon and appeared to be, based on thermal and life sign readings, home to approximately 4 million inhabitants. It was not under construction. It appeared finished, operational and thoroughly domesticated. They could detect food production signatures, water reclamation systems, medical facilities, schools. In the asteroid belt, the 2 mining vessels were not simply extracting ore. They were processing it on-site, using energy beams of a kind the Valderath had developed only in the last 600 years, techniques of focused plasma mining that required extremely precise energy modulation. And they were doing it faster, somehow. More efficiently. With less waste energy signature than the best Valderath mining array. Near the second planet, Venus, 4 vessels appeared to be engaged in something that Suk initially misidentified as terraforming preparation. When she refined the scan, she sat back in her seat and said quietly, "They're already doing it. Active atmospheric processing. They're changing Venus's atmosphere. On purpose. Right now. Terraforming." The Valderath had the technology. It was expensive, slow, and used only on the most strategically important acquisition targets. It took, on average, 800 years for meaningful atmospheric change. What's their projected timeline for Venus? Beth asked. Suk ran the atmospheric change rate against known models. Based on the rate of change I'm detecting, 40 to 60 years. 40 to 60 years. Not 800. Veth returned to his seat and began composing his report to Zervan Prime personally. He did not delegate this one. There was a particular kind of message that had to come from a commanding officer, with a commanding officer's weight behind it. It couldn't be a routine data packet. It had to be a statement. He recorded it simply and directly. High Counselor Dravok Salyan. I am transmitting from the Oort cloud of the Sol system, observing the third planet, Earth, home of the species designated humanity. I will file the complete sensor logs with this message for your scientific teams to analyze. But I want to state for the record, before the data speaks for itself, what I have witnessed with my own eyes and sensors. This civilization is not what our survey designated them. They are not Class J. They are not pre-stellar. By any metric I can apply, they are post-Type 2 and advancing. Their technology in several specific domains, propulsion efficiency, atmospheric engineering, quantum communication, orbital construction, exceeds current Valderath imperial standards. I have no explanation for how this occurred in 400 years. I am not certain there is a conventional explanation. What I am certain of is this. The Valderath Empire does not currently have a protocol for this situation, because we have never encountered it before. I await your guidance. But I would recommend strongly that we do not approach this world as we have approached others. These people are not waiting to be civilized. I believe, if anything, they have been waiting to be found. He sealed the message and transmitted it on a priority 1-fold space relay channel. Then he turned back to his viewport. While the crew of the ISV Precise Clarity sat in their silent ship at the edge of the solar system, quietly cataloging wonders, something changed on their stealth monitoring display. A soft ping from the passive sensor array. Sook glanced at it. Looked again. Her bioluminescence went dark, the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "Captain," she said, her voice very careful. "Something just pinged us." Veth turned sharply. "We're in full stealth." "Yes, sir. We are." She looked up from her console. "They pinged us anyway. And the signal, it was addressed. To us specifically. It's in Valderath standard encoding." The bridge was utterly silent for 3 full seconds. "They know we're here," Veth said. "Yes, sir. And the message they sent us." Sook hesitated, then read it aloud. It was short. Just 2 lines. "Welcome to the Sol system. We've been expecting someone. We thought it would take you a bit longer to visit. Please don't leave, we'd love to talk." Veth Nero looked at his crew. His crew looked at him. And somewhere deep in his chest, where he kept the part of himself that had once been a young officer filled with the certainty that the Valderath Empire was the crown of all creation, something quietly and permanently shifted. Dr. Serafina Voss had not slept in 31 hours. She did not particularly mind. She had gone without sleep for longer periods during the 11 years she had spent building the quantum resonance beacon network, and compared to those stretches of desperate, frantic engineering, staying awake to make first contact with an alien civilization felt positively reasonable. She was sitting in the main communications bay of the Atacama facility, surrounded by her team of 18 scientists and engineers, all of them staring at screens showing the data flow from the exchange they had initiated. The alien vessel in the Oort cloud had not responded to her greeting message yet. But it was still there. Their passive quantum resonance arrays could feel it like a held breath at the edge of the solar system. "They're scanning us again," said Dr. Priya Sundaram, the network's quantum sensor specialist. Priya was a compact, precise woman from Bengaluru who communicated primarily in data and had once described a supernova as statistically elegant. She was now watching a cascade of sensor return data with an expression approaching reverence. "Deep scan. They're being very careful. Very quiet." "Let them look," Serafina said. "We want them to understand what they're looking at before they decide whether to talk to us." "And what are they looking at?" asked Dr. Marcus Okonkwo, who had been the first to notice the signal return 3 weeks ago and had barely left the facility since. "Us," Serafina said simply. "The real us. Not what we were 400 years ago." The consortium had known this moment was coming for decades. The quantum resonance network had been built not just as a communication tool but as a statement, a deliberate, engineered announcement to whatever civilizations might be monitoring the galaxy that humanity was ready. Not just technologically. Philosophically. The decision about who would speak for Earth had been made years before the first beacon went live. It had not been a government. It had not been a military commander or a political leader. It had been, after extensive global deliberation, a scientist. Specifically, Serafina Voss herself, who had designed the beacon network and who, at 44 years old, had the unusual combination of technical brilliance, multilingual mathematical communication training, and, perhaps most importantly, an unshakable personal calm. Her backup was Dr. Elias Stormgard in Oslo, who was currently awake and monitoring everything on a secure feed, dressed in his pajamas and refusing all offers to put on something more appropriate. "They're going to come closer," said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's xenolinguistics specialist, looking up from her analysis of the scan patterns. Yuki was 29 years old and had spent her entire academic career preparing for exactly this conversation. "The scan pattern has shifted. They're triangulating approach vectors." "Good," Serafina said. "Send them the docking invitation." Marcus looked up sharply. "The docking invitation? Already?" "They've been sitting out in the cold for 3 weeks watching us. They've seen everything. If they were hostile they would have made some kind of move by now. They're cautious." She allowed herself a small smile. "Honestly, it's kind of sweet." The docking invitation was a pre-prepared communication package, a set of approach vectors, navigational data, and an explicit welcome message that had been designed to convey in several universal mathematical frameworks. "We know you're there, we are not afraid, and we invite peaceful dialogue." It included coordinates for the Lunar Gateway Station, humanity's deep space diplomatic facility positioned in high lunar orbit, which had been specifically built and furnished with alien physiology considerations in mind, because the consortium had always believed that eventually, it would be needed. The invitation went out on the quantum channel. The vessel in the Oort cloud received it within milliseconds. On board the ISV Precise Clarity, Captain Veth Nero read the docking invitation twice. Then he called his crew together and told them what he intended to do, which was to respond, request formal first contact protocols, And, if permission was granted by Zervan Prime, approach. Permission came from Zervan Prime within the day. It came with considerable additional instructions from Dravak Salyun, all of which could be summarized as, proceed with extreme caution, gather maximum intelligence, commit to nothing, and do not embarrass the Empire. The ISV Precise Clarity dropped stealth and began its approach. The moment it did, humanity's sensors lit up across the inner system. Serafina watched the tracking data update in real time. The alien vessel was fast, graceful, and designed in a way that made even the engineers in the room murmur appreciatively. Smooth organic curves. No visible propulsion exhaust. A hull material that absorbed 93% of incoming electromagnetic radiation. Beautiful ship, Marcus said. Scary ship, said Priya. Both, Serafina agreed. The ISV Precise Clarity reached the Lunar Gateway Station 47 hours later. Captain Veth Narrow brought it in on a careful docking approach, matching the rotation of the station's outer ring with the kind of precision that came from decades of experience. He had docked with strange stations before. This one was different only in that the beings who had built it were not Valderath, and yet the engineering reflected a grasp of orbital mechanics, material science, and habitat design that was instantly, uncomfortably familiar. They were good at this. These humans. They were very, very good at this. The airlock cycled. Veth stood at the head of a small delegation. Himself, Imuva Ril, who had made the journey from Zervan Prime specifically for this moment, and 2 security officers who were there more for protocol than for any practical defensive purpose he could imagine being relevant. The inner door opened. Standing on the other side, alone, was a human woman. Shorter than any of them by at least 30 centimeters. 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry. Brown skin, dark curling hair pulled back from her face. Brown eyes that were calm and steady, and Veth noted this immediately because he was trained to notice such things, entirely unafraid. She was wearing a plain dark jacket. No armor. No visible weapons. No ceremonial dress. She said something in what the translator unit identified as English, a dominant human language, and then, before the translator had fully processed it, she said the same thing again in something that the unit flagged with a small alert. Valderath Standard. Accented. But grammatically precise. Welcome to the Sol System. My name is Serafina Voss. I represent the Global Research Consortium and, in this moment, humanity. I'm very glad you decided not to leave. Veth Narrow stared at her for a long moment. The translator caught up. He had understood the Valderath words correctly. You speak our language, he said. A functional version of it, she said. We decoded your beacon protocols. Your language structure emerged from the beacon data about 8 years ago. We've been practicing. 8 years, Imuva said softly, almost to herself. 8 years. The Valderath Xenolinguistics Division, with all of the Empire's resources behind it, typically took between 15 and 20 years to achieve functional mastery of a new species' primary language. Come inside, Serafina said. There's a meeting room prepared. We've tried to make it comfortable for your physiology. If we got anything wrong, please tell us and we'll adjust. They followed her. The Lunar Gateway Station was clean, precisely engineered, and throughout its corridors and meeting spaces there were signs of the same thing that had struck Veth about the orbital city over Earth. It was not just functional. It was lived in. It was designed by people who expected other people to inhabit it for a long time, comfortably. In the meeting room, large table, chairs scaled to accommodate different body types, atmospheric controls, water dispensed in 3 different chemical compositions including one tuned to Valderath biological preferences. Serafina sat across from them and placed her hands flat on the table. I want to be honest with you, she said. We've known about you for a while. Not you specifically, your empire. We detected some of your deep scan probes about 60 years ago and worked backward from the technology signatures. We've had some time to prepare. Veth thought about the 400-year gap in their observation record. You've known for 60 years. Yes, Serafina said simply. We didn't want to reach out until we were ready. We wanted to be the kind of species worth talking to. She met his eyes. We hope we are. There was a silence in the room that felt, to Veth Narrow, less like awkwardness and more like the held pause before something very large and very irreversible begins. He made a decision then, without authorization from Dravak Salyun, without protocol, without precedent. He reached across the table and placed his 4-fingered hand briefly on the surface. The Valderath gesture of meeting acknowledgement, the equivalent of a handshake. You are, he said. The High Council of the Valderath Empire had not been called to full session in 11 years. The last time every seat had been filled and every counselor present in person rather than via holographic relay, it had been to formalize the annexation of the Gravan Collective, a moderately advanced civilization in the Outer Rim that had surrendered after 18 months of diplomatic pressure and one strategic demonstration of military force. A routine affair by Valderath standards. History without drama. This session was not a routine affair. High Counselor Dravak Salyun stood at the center of the great semicircular chamber, beneath the vast illuminated dome that projected a real-time map of the Empire's 412 star systems. 31 counselors ringed the space in tiers of polished obsidian seats. The room smelled of ozone and old authority. It was the most powerful room on the most powerful planet in the known galaxy. It felt, today, somewhat less certain of itself than usual. "I will summarize the situation," Dravak said, and his voice, calm, precise, the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime never sounding uncertain, carried to every corner of the chamber without assistance. Approximately 4 weeks ago, a species designated humanity, inhabiting a Class J world in the Milky Way's Orion arm, transmitted a quantum-entangled signal that our deep space monitoring array detected. We dispatched the ISV Precise Clarity for observation. Captain Veth Narrow's report, which you have all received, details what was found. The full sensor data is available for individual review. I am here to discuss implications. Counselor Vreen Makathar of the Outer Expansion Council was the first to speak. He was old, powerful, and had built his career on the confident processing of interstellar expansion data. "The sensor data," he said, choosing words carefully, "is difficult to contextualize. It is difficult to accept," said Counselor Devon Pell, younger, sharper, and less committed to diplomatic understatement. "Let us not perform for each other. The data shows a civilization that 4 centuries ago was burning hydrocarbons for energy and is now operating antimatter drives with efficiency ratings above our own. The data shows quantum fold resonators in orbit of their home planet. The data shows active terraforming of a neighboring planet at a rate we cannot match. I have read Captain Narrow's report and I have reviewed the sensor logs, and I am sitting here trying to identify a single technological domain in which the Valderath Empire currently holds a measurable advantage over humanity, and I am finding the list shorter than I am comfortable with." "They do not have fold space travel," Counselor Vreen said. "Yet," said Devon. A ripple of discomfort moved through the chamber. Dravak raised a hand and the room quieted. "Let us address the critical question," he said. "Not the question of their technology, which is a matter for the Science Directorate to analyze in depth. The critical question is this: how? How did a species advance from early industrial civilization to post-Type 2 in 400 years? The standard developmental arc across every civilization the Empire has observed, absorbed, or archived ranges from 1200 years at minimum to 8000 years at maximum for the equivalent technological leap. We have no record of anything approaching 400 years. Chief Science Director Imuva Rill, who had returned from the Lunar Gateway meeting aboard a priority transport, stood from her seat. She was the youngest director in the Council's history and was not intimidated by the room. "I have been analyzing this since I returned from Earth orbit," she said. "I have 3 hypotheses, none of which are mutually exclusive." The chamber listened. First, humanity experienced one or more catastrophic near-extinction events in their recent history that functioned as an accelerant. Under extreme survival pressure, civilizations have been documented to innovate at rates that exceed normal developmental curves. If they faced sufficient existential threat, environmental, pandemic, conflict-based, and survived it, the pressure may have driven unprecedented technological focus. "What kind of threat?" asked Counselor Pell. "Multiple simultaneous ones, based on the fragmentary historical data we have. Climate instability, resource depletion, disease events, and geopolitical conflict all appear to have coincided within a relatively compressed time window. Other civilizations in similar positions collapsed. Humanity didn't." Imova paused. "I think it's important to note that they nearly did by all evidence. And then they didn't." "Second hypothesis," Dravak prompted. "Cooperative innovation at unprecedented scale. Most civilizations we have observed fragment under stress, into nation-states, factions, competing power structures that slow or reverse technological progress. Humanity appears to have done the opposite. The global research consortium that represents them diplomatically is not a government. It is a self-organizing scientific cooperative that spans their entire planet and orbital infrastructure. Their research methodology, from what we can decode of their academic archives, appears to be radically open source. Every discovery immediately available to every researcher on the network. The compounding effect of that kind of collaborative acceleration over several generations is... She searched for the word. Extraordinary. Third, said Dravok. Imova took a breath. Third, and I want to be careful how I phrase this because it is speculative. I believe they may simply be unusually well suited as a species to technological innovation. Their cognition, as best I can assess from the communication data and the records in their own archives, operates in a particular way, highly associative, highly lateral, with a tolerance for ambiguity and failure that allows them to attempt things other species would flag as impossible before trying. They try anyway. Repeatedly. Very fast. And when something fails, they analyze the failure and incorporate it into the next attempt. She looked around the chamber. We have a word in the science directorate for this approach. It is not a compliment typically. We call it chaotic. But I think in their case the chaos is the strategy. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Dravok Salyan looked at the map above him, 412 star systems, the accumulated authority of 3,000 years. Then he looked back at his counselors. I want to ask something that has not been asked in this chamber before, he said. Not in my tenure. Not, to my knowledge, in the past 1,000 years of recorded council proceedings. Every counselor was watching him now. Is the Valderath Empire prepared to treat another civilization as an equal? The silence that followed was not the silence of comfortable consideration. It was the silence of a room full of people confronting a question they had never needed to consider before and discovering that they did not immediately have an answer. Counselor Devon Pell spoke first. We would need to define what that means. Yes, said Dravok. We would. Their military capability is unknown, said Counselor Vreen, retreating instinctively to the familiar framework of threat assessment. We don't know if they have defensive or offensive weapon systems. We should perhaps ask them, Imova said mildly. Another ripple. Several counselors exchanged glances that ranged from discomfort to something approaching fear, not the fear of a threat, but the subtler and more destabilizing fear of irrelevance. Dravok let the room sit with it. Then, I am authorizing a formal diplomatic mission to Earth. Not an observation mission. Not an assessment mission. A diplomatic mission with full protocol status. I am personally appointing Director Rill as the Empire's lead diplomatic representative. He met her eyes. She nodded. Our objective will be to establish communication, understand their intentions, and determine what kind of relationship is possible between our two civilizations. And if they want something we're not prepared to give? Asked Counselor Vreen. Dravok considered the woman standing alone in the Lunar Gateway Station airlock, calm, unafraid, offering them welcome instead of challenge. He thought about Captain Neryl's face when he had filed his report. He thought about a species that had nearly destroyed itself and then, instead, turned its impossible energy outward and built its way to the stars. Then, he said, we will have a very interesting conversation. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Serafina Voss had finally slept 8 hours in a cot in the Atacama facility, surrounded by the soft hum of the quantum beacon network. When she woke, she found a message waiting on her terminal. It was from the alien vessel, now parked in high lunar orbit while its captain awaited instructions. It read, the Valderath High Council is convening. A formal diplomatic mission will be authorized. We will return with more people and clearer intentions. Thank you for your patience. She read it twice. Then she called Marcus. They're coming back, she said. Officially? Officially. Marcus exhaled. How long do we have to get ready? She pulled up the council session timestamp and did the calculation. About 3 weeks. That's not very long. No, she said. But we've had longer waits. She was already pulling up her diplomatic preparation files. And we're better at fast than most. The second arrival of the Valderath diplomatic mission was nothing like the first. Where the ISV Precise Clarity had crept through the Oort cloud in stealth, this convoy came openly, 4 vessels, the largest an Imperial diplomatic cruiser called the IDS Voice of Salyun, moving in precise formation through the outer system with identification signals broadcasting on every frequency. They had announced their arrival 48 hours in advance, sent a detailed manifest of their delegation's composition, and requested confirmation that their approach was welcome before entering the inner system. They asked permission, Marcus said, watching the convoy's approach track on the main display. That's different. That's everything, Serafina said. The delegation that docked with the Lunar Gateway Station 3 days later was 23 individuals strong. High Counselor Dravok Salyun himself had made the journey, a fact that, according to the historical records they had decoded, meant that the Valderath Empire had never sent a sitting High Counselor on a first contact mission in its entire 3,000-year history. It meant something. Everyone on the human side of the table understood that it meant something. Drivak Salyun was taller than Serafina had expected, nearly 2.5 meters, lean and gray-skinned, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who was accustomed to every person in a room watching them. He wore formal imperial robes, dark blue and silver, and he carried himself with the precise dignity of long authority. But his eyes, pale, luminous, the eyes of a man who had spent decades reading situations, moved around the Lunar Gateway meeting chamber with what Serafina recognized as genuine, unsuppressed curiosity. He was interested. Not just politically, personally. She liked that. Director Imuva Ril stood at his right. She had made this journey twice now, and carried herself with the easy comfort of someone who felt at home here. She caught Serafina's eye and gave a small nod. Serafina returned it. The human delegation matched in number, 23, drawn from the consortium's member organizations across every continent. Dr. Elias Stormguard had finally arrived in person from Oslo, wearing an appropriately pressed suit and an expression of contained wonder. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was there as language coordinator. And behind them, via holographic relay on a panel that the consortium's engineers had spent 72 hours integrating into the station's existing systems, were representatives from 12 different human nations, present not to govern the conversation but to witness it. Drivak Salyun stood at the head of the table and looked at Serafina Voss for a long moment before speaking. Then he said in careful accented English, "Dr. Voss, I am told that is how your people address each other in formal settings." The room, both delegations reacted with a ripple of surprise. The High Counselor had learned English. Or at least enough of it. "That's right," Serafina said, allowing herself a genuine smile. "And we'd be glad to have this conversation in either language or both." They sat. What followed over the next 6 days was something that had no real precedent in Valderath diplomatic history, and was frankly unprecedented in human history as well. It was not a negotiation. It was not an assessment. It was, more than anything, a conversation. Long, careful, occasionally halting, sometimes technically complex, sometimes surprisingly simple, between two civilizations meeting each other honestly for the first time. Humanity asked questions. Real questions, the kind that demonstrated they had done their homework for 60 years. About the structure of the Valderath Empire, the nature of the civilizations that had been absorbed into it, the mechanics of fold space travel, which they wanted plainly and without embarrassment to understand, the Empire's current technological challenges, their scientific priorities. They asked these questions not with the deference of suppliants or the caution of the threatened but with the straightforward interest of people who found other people's problems genuinely engaging. The Valderath delegation answered. Carefully at first, revealing little of strategic value. But Imuva Ril had briefed Drivak on something she had observed in her first meeting. Humans responded to honesty with honesty at a rate that was almost reflexive. If you gave them a real answer, they gave you a real answer back. If you were guarded, they remained politely open but subtly retreated from intimacy. It was Drivak himself who made the choice to stop being guarded. On the third day, when the conversation had turned to the Valderath Empire's expansion strategy, he set aside the carefully prepared diplomatic language and said simply, "We have, in the past, approached new civilizations with the assumption that we were offering something they needed. Stability. Technology. A place within a structure larger than themselves. We told ourselves this was benevolent." He paused. "Looking at what you have built here in 4 centuries without us, I find myself reconsidering the assumption." The room was quiet. "The Gravan Collective," said Dr. Stormguard. He had been reviewing the historical archives they had managed to decode. "They didn't want to join the Empire." "No," Drivak said. "They didn't." "What happened to them?" "They are part of the Empire now," Drivak said. His voice was neutral but his eyes were not. "Stable. Administered. Growing according to our metrics." He looked at the table. "I have never been asked before whether growing according to our metrics is what they wanted." Serafina let that sit. Then she said, "We're not going to tell you how to run your empire. That's not who we are or what we're here for. But we would like, very much, to be the kind of neighbors who can say honestly when they see something that concerns them. And we'd expect the same from you." "Neighbors?" Drivak said, tasting the word. It was not a Valderath diplomatic category. "It's what you are," she said simply. "You're out there, we're in here, and we share the same galaxy. Might as well get along." On the 5th day, the conversation turned to technology. Both delegations had quietly agreed, without it being explicitly stated, that there would be a genuine exchange, not a one-sided one. The humans presented three things: a detailed overview of their antimatter drive efficiency architecture, which caused Dramic Oso, attending via secure relay, to stop breathing for a measurable moment, their atmospheric processing methodology that was transforming Venus, and their quantum fold resonator network. The last item, the fold resonators, drew the most sustained and intense response from the Valderath scientific delegates. Because the fold resonators were not just impressive engineering. They were, to the Valderath eye, a new approach, a way of interacting with fold space that was adjacent to what the Empire knew, but different enough that three of the Valderath scientists spent an entire afternoon sitting with Dr. Priya Sundaram, simply asking questions and then sitting quietly to think. In return, the Valderath provided detailed data on fold space navigation, a domain in which they had 3 millennia of mapped experience. They provided xenobiological archives of the 61 civilizations they had encountered. And they provided something unexpected: maps. Detailed, comprehensive cartographic data on the Orion arm of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems annotated with survey data, resource assessments, and the locations of currently uncontacted civilizations. Serafina looked at those maps for a long time when they were first presented. There were a lot of civilizations out there. Most of them, the annotations noted, were at various prestellar stages. "We would like," she said carefully, "to be involved in how you approach those civilizations. Going forward." Drvok studied her. "As partners?" "As partners," she confirmed. Another long pause. And then Drvok Salyun, High Counselor of the Valderath Empire, ruler of 412 star systems and 3,000 years of accumulated authority, did something that startled his entire delegation. He laughed. It was not a long laugh and it was not entirely comfortable, but it was genuine. "You are," he said in English this time, "exactly what Imuva told me you would be." "What did she tell you?" Serafina asked. Imuva answered from across the table with a small smile. "I told him you were the kind of species that wouldn't wait to be invited, and wouldn't apologize for showing up, and would make the galaxy more interesting whether we wanted that or not." Serafina considered this. "That's pretty accurate," she admitted. "I told him," Imuva continued, "that I thought it was time the Empire had neighbors it couldn't predict." Outside the Lunar Gateway Station, in the cold and patient dark, the galaxy turned as it always had, indifferent to the dramas of the small warm creatures scurrying across its face. But in that meeting room, over 6 days and many cups of beverages that both sides found interesting if not entirely palatable, something small and stubborn and irreversible had begun. Not the end of the Valderath Empire. Not the conquest or capitulation of humanity. Something rarer and harder and more worth having. The beginning of a relationship between two civilizations that had both, in their different ways, earned the right to sit at the same table. Serafina Voss walked the delegation to the airlock on the 6th day. Drvok Salyun paused before stepping through and looked back at her. "We will return," he said. "We'll be here," she said. Then, because she was human and couldn't help it, "and we'll probably have built something impressive by the time you do." He looked at her for a moment. And then, again that small unpracticed laugh. "Yes," said the High Counselor of the Galactic Empire. "I rather expect you will."